And then I was like, oh my god, look at his shade, that's so lust. Well, one of us is gonna have to change.
Alright, so hello everyone and welcome to my review of Baruuk, the Reluctant Warrior. So first things first, if you want to get your hands on Baruuk, you will have to progress through the Voxelaris reputation that's represented by Little Duck in Fortuna, because all the parts required to build Baruuk are simply sold by Little Duck once you reach the appropriate rank. Now stat-wise, Baruuk isn't actually all that beefy. Most of his tankiness comes from his abilities, because he only comes with 75 health, which goes up to 225 at rank 30, 100 shields, which goes up to 300 at rank 30, and 150 armor, which really isn't all that high. He also comes with 200 energy, which will bump up to 300 at rank 30, sprint speed of 1.2, which is faster than most other frames, and he comes with 4 innate polarities, a dash in the aura slot, a dash in the exile slot, and then 2 Ds. Now the idea behind Baruuk is to have a really tanky frame that doesn't rely on either health and armor like Inauros or a singular ability like Rhino with Iron Skin. He's also the first frame that I would consider to have a true ultimate ability, because it needs to be charged up by using other abilities and it doesn't use energy, it uses a special resource called Restraint instead. Now interestingly enough, this new Restraint resource actually starts topped off and slowly drains as Baruuk uses abilities and affects enemies with them. With the exception of his fourth and ultimate ability, which are, let's just call them, a very unique pair of exalted fists that will restore restraint as Baruuk uses them. So it's essentially like a rage meter, but in reverse. Rather than filling it up as you do damage, you're actually draining it. However, activating Baruuk's ultimate ability is not the only purpose of this restraint meter, because Baruuk will also gain more and more damage reduction as his restraint is drained, all the way up to 50% when it's empty. And I think that's enough blabbering for now, so let's check out Baruuk's abilities more in depth. So Baruuk's first ability is called Elude, where he will just straight up dodge all incoming projectiles that are coming at him from a cone in front of him. The cone is based on where Baruuk is facing, not where your camera is facing, so even if you're facing the enemy with your camera but your Baruuk is turned the other way around, he will not dodge bullets and take all the damage. Also, as you can see over here, Baruuk will not dodge any projectiles if you're either swinging your melee weapon or you're firing your guns, even if you're facing the enemy that's firing at you. And every attack you dodge with Elude will remove 0.6% of Baruuk's restraint. Now Elude is a toggle ability that will drain 2.5 energy every second. And it works just like any other toggle ability that will drain your energy, so while it's active you can only gain energy via energy orbs, arcane energize someone else touching a death orb in the void, or rage and or hunter adrenaline. The last two, which is hunter adrenaline and rage, being the most interesting, because while it might seem a little bit pointless to put rage and hunter adrenaline, which generate energy from you taking damage, on a frame that can dodge pretty much everything, it allows you to do some fun stuff, like for example turning your back on the enemy for a couple of seconds to generate some energy via those mods and then turning back again. Now the initial cone in which Baruuk will dodge projectiles starts off at a 180-degree angle, but it can be increased with power range. And if you get enough range, you can actually make it cover pretty much the entirety of your frame. And the only other mods that will affect Elude in any way, shape or form are power efficiency for a cost reduction for the initial activation, as well as the drain that follows it, and power duration for reduction in the energy drain. And just for those 5 people that keep telling me over and over and over again that duration doesn't actually affect energy drain, put on Transient Fortitude and you will see the increase in energy drain yourself. And finally, there's also a synergy between Elude and Baruuk's third ability, Desolate Hands, but I will talk about that later. Baruuk's second ability is called the Lull, where he sends out a wave of calming energy that will gradually slow enemies down until they fall asleep. The wave will initially cover an area of 25 meters and linger around for 5 seconds, and at this point you cannot recast the ability. However, once the wave dissipates, you can cast it again, even if there are enemies still asleep from the previous one. Which will happen rather often, because while the initial wave only lingers around for 5 seconds, the enemies are put asleep for 25 seconds. Now damaging the enemies in any way, shape or form will wake them up early, but they will will be a little bit confused and their alert level will be reset. This might sound like a bit of an issue when it comes to really beefy enemies that probably won't go down in one shot, but luckily putting the enemies to sleep also opens them up to melee finishers, allowing you to do either a ton of damage or straight up one-shot them with cover lethality. Now the area that Lull will cover is of course affected by ability range, and both the duration of the calming wave as well as the duration the enemies will be put to sleep for are affected by power duration. And finally, Lull is a two-handed ability, so it will interrupt any other actions such as reloading. However, it can be cast while airborne, and each enemy affected by Lull will drain roughly 0.8% of your restraint. Baruuk's third ability is called Desolate Hands, where he summons a bunch of daggers that will hover around him. Now you get 8 daggers as base, and each dagger provides 10% damage reduction for a grand total of 80, but you can push it up to 90 if you want to. But if you get too close to an enemy, one of the daggers will home in on them, do 250 damage in a 3-meter radius in a small explosion, and it will destroy the enemy's weapon. And that of course removes one of the daggers, which means you also lose some damage reduction. But it's not the only way in which you can lose daggers, because the daggers can also hop onto allies and provide damage reduction for them instead of you. Luckily though, you can always recast the ability, which will replenish any lost daggers. Now the number of daggers as well as the damage the daggers do when they seek out enemies are both affected by power strength, and power strength also sort of indirectly affects the damage reduction because it can be pushed up to 90% if you have more than 8 daggers. And then, aside from power efficiency of course, which will affect the activation cost of the ability, we have power range, which will affect both the range at which daggers will seek out enemies and allies, but also the area of effect of the explosion when they hit an enemy. Range is also where the synergy with Baruuk's first ability, Elude, comes in, because if you have Elude active, the daggers will seek out enemies at twice the range. And finally, each enemy hit by the daggers will remove roughly 1.5% of your restraint. And Baruuk's fourth and final ability is called Serene Storm, and this is where Baruuk has had enough and he decided to bust out some moves. This is basically a sparring weapon that sends out waves of damage that pierce through enemies, and it has a really cool moveset. And it's very much a proper exalted weapon that can be modded separately, and it has a full combo set, so there is a normal button mash combo which will push enemies away from you, and a forward combo that will do pretty much the same thing. We also have a block combo which will pull enemies towards you instead, and a hold combo where you basically do a charge attack at the start and follow it with a bunch of button mashing which will levitate enemies off the ground, which is something you can also achieve by simply doing a slide attack. And finally there are the slams, so a normal slam will push enemies away from you, but a slam while blocking will pull them towards you instead. So yeah, as I've said, a very cool moveset. Now, as I've sort of mentioned already, this is the ability that will restore your strength, and it does so at about 0.8% every second. This is what you're building towards by using Baruuk's other abilities, which by the way you can still use while you have Serene Storm active, so you can still drain your restraint by using the daggers or, eluding attacks and putting enemies to sleep. Now the base damage here is 250 and it's split equally between impact, puncture and slash, with the damaging wave that you send out with most attacks dissipating after about 2 meters. And the supporting stats on this are actually pretty good. It has a 50% crit chance with a 2x crit multiplier and 10% status chance, so it's definitely best built for crit. But that's not the end of all the good stuff, because Baruuk will also block most frontal attacks, though that's not that big of a deal because you most likely have Elude active already, so you're dodging them anyway. Each enemy that you hit directly with your fists, not the wave that you're shooting forward, has a chance to be disarmed, and Baruuk gets 25% damage reduction at base while it's active. The only kind of downside here, but not really, is that exalted weapons have a pretty limited mod pool, so they don't have ribbons and they can't use things like Blood Rush, even though Blood Rush wouldn't really make that much sense over here because you can't sustain it forever. And the fact that power range doesn't do anything, it just straight up doesn't work. Now the damage is of course affected by the melee mods that you bought on the exalted weapon itself in your arsenal screen, but also power strength, which also affects the damage reduction Baruuk gets while Serene Storm is active, and it's hard capped at 40%, you can't go beyond that. And that's pretty much it as far as Warframe mods are concerned. Power range, as I've said already, doesn't do anything. Power efficiency doesn't work because you're using restraint, not energy, and restraint is not affected by power efficiency, and power duration doesn't seem to do anything either. And now we come to the conclusion. So do I like Baruuk, yes or no? Yes, I actually like Baruuk quite a bit. I wasn't quite sure in the beginning, but the more I play Baruuk, the more I like him. He's kind of right up my alley. He's very tanky, which I like. He enhances gunplay while he's draining his restraint, which I like. And once his restraint is drained, he has an awesome melee moveset, which I also like. The only thing he's missing to be absolutely perfect for me is a pet with good AI. Other than that, Baruuk is awesome, and it's coming from someone who was very skeptical about the idea of Baruuk, because I was like, okay, so you're making a frame that's gonna make it a lot harder to do something that my Inaros does by simply existing. But they absolutely nailed it. It's really fun and enjoyable to be tanky with Baruuk. And as much as I like Korra with Venari and stuff, and as much as I liked Garuda, He is one of my favorite frames they released in a while. So yes, I would very much recommend you go through the reputation to pick up Baruuk because he's awesome, he's really strong, he's very tanky, and most importantly, he is a ton of fun to play. And that's pretty much it for the Baruuk review, so I thank you very much for watching. As always guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video, I hope it was helpful, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.